Hey guys, how's it going? It is the sixth day of Litmas, and today is supposed to be your story with literature, what part it's played in your life, I guess. And this is going to be an interesting video. I have decided to put up pictures of me from throughout my life just for the heck of it, since I'm already talking about literature throughout my life. So hopefully you aren't too freaked out. I was a bit of a weird kid. um, and if you see a dog at any point throughout this montage of photos, it's our dog Sage, who died in 2014, but is still the main dog of my life. So I feel like for BookTube, I have a bit of a weird reading history. Because I wasn't a reader as a kid. I didn't really become a reader till I was about 21. But when I was very young, my mom tried to get me to read, in kind of the same way she tried to get me to eat, salads. It was one of those things that, your mom tries to make you do because it's good for you, etc. And I just didn't have it. But so I didn't read for a long time, and then I got to middle school, and I actually found a book series that I liked. It was the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series, which I've mentioned a couple times here. It's about this fantastical world where owls talk and they have like a civilization, and it's kind of a pretty conventional fantasy story, aside from it being about owls. But I gobbled it up. I loved it. But I didn't fall in love with reading because of it. I fell in love with Guardians of Ga'Hoole, not with reading. And in middle school also, I think as a result of reading Guardians of Ga'Hoole, became interested in writing. And I actually wrote two novels in middle school. One was about wolves, because almost all the novels I've tried to write have been about animals, which is probably because both of the big series I was into as a kid were both about animals. And then the other, I think, was a more conventional fantasy about humans. And in middle school also, I started to read encyclopedias a lot. I'd always been really into dinosaurs, and I had several dinosaur encyclopedias, and I read those constantly. I had an encyclopedia of world religions. I got very interested in religion. I was always reading that, and I also got very interested in history. And yet again, I had sort of a children's, not well, middle grade encyclopedia of history, and so all of those I was reading constantly, but not like cover to cover, just like snippets from. I really liked just gathering up little pieces of data. So yeah, and I mean, Guardians, those weren't the only things I read in middle school. I did read, like, the first two novels of the Inheritance cycle, but aside from that, it was about it. And then in high school, I also read another series, Warriors, which is about cats, about wild cats. And I also continued to write stories. I also always wanted to write novels, but would always kind of start them and, like, write the first scene and then not really know where to go from there, so I never finished any after middle school. Uh, so yeah, but again, with like Warriors, I fell in love with the series Warriors and not with reading. And then in college, I continued to read sporadically. I didn't get any major series I was into. I read the Ender's Game series in about a week at one point. I read Harry Potter after I graduated from high school for the first time. I kind of went and explored my interest in religion a bit more. I read, like, the Bhagavad Gita. I read the Upanishads, or at least the selection from the Upanishads, as translated by Eknath Easwaran. I tried to read the Bible several times and finally succeeded when I was like 20 or 21. So yeah, again, I had specific interests, but no, I wasn't like reading wasn't a part of my identity or even something I held as this big hobby of mine. But what's weird is that throughout all of this, even back in middle school and in high school and in college, even though I didn't read that much, I was a huge buyer of books. I loved buying books, and I always saw books and said, "Wow, I would love that," and bought it, and then didn't read it, of course. And a lot of the books I bought were like these big books of history because I loved history as a kid. Um, so, by the time I was in college, I had this like library of history books that I hadn't read, or even like opened since the day I bought them. Um, but then in my junior year of college, and this is gonna be, I I'm uncertain about this narrative of how I finally became interested in reading because I have this aspect of my personality where I will just get obsessed with something slowly throughout the course of a month. I will slowly get more and more and more obsessed until it like consumes every aspect of my being. Um, and I can never quite explain what prompts that. So this narrative of how I finally became a reader is going to be sort of um, uncertain, but it's the best I could think of when I tried to think through this time. But I took a history of psychology class. Um, and the history of psychology has a lot of philosophy in it, just because for a long time psychology was basically a subfield of philosophy. It wasn't its own scientific field. And so I learned about like Plato. I learned about Descartes. And those are the two big ones I was interested in after history of psychology. And I read Plato's Republic after it, and I read that one book with a really long title by Descartes that's really short and really boring. And then kind of through the grapevine, because I was interested in philosophy, I found out about Friedrich Nietzsche and Thomas More. And I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Utopia. And I don't know. After those, I told a friend of mine was really into the film Cloud Atlas, but he hadn't read the novel, and he had convinced me to see the film finally. But I said I wanted to read the novel first, so I read Cloud Atlas, and I think that also got me into literary fiction, and the reading of the philosophy got me into nonfiction, and I don't know. I guess the rest is history. The summer after that, I I read a ton. I set myself a goal of reading 50 pages a day. And I read a biography I had in my shelf. I read A History of the Arab Peoples. I read Soul Mountain by Gao Xingzhan. Um, yeah, and then basically just kept riding. I'm still kind of riding that wave. Like I said, I consider reading one of those obsessions I get sometimes. And but I think another important point in the history of my reading life is in my senior year of college when I took a course on D.H. Lawrence and Thomas Hardy. Because I think before I took that course, I felt like any meaning I found in a novel had to be um, sort of depersonalized or universal to everyone, and that there wasn't room for kind of just seeing yourself in a novel. But this professor really encouraged all of us. We had to write essays, but we also wrote these journals about the novels we read, and often many of us would just write about our experiences that were similar to those of the people in the novels, and I think that idea that you can look at a novel and you can see yourself in a novel and just relate to a character because of just what's happened in your life, it had a big effect on how I read. And so yeah, from there I got more and more into reading until I decided that the level of stimulation in terms of discussing books in my life wasn't satisfactory, and I had to join BookTube. Um, and here I am. So yeah, I guess that's it. I hope it was coherent. Um, but yeah, so that is my attempt to tell my story with literature. Um, Thank you for watching, everyone. I will see you tomorrow for I can't remember what, but I will see you tomorrow for another Litmus video. And thank you for watching. Bye, guys.